What is the most broken Duel Links skill of all time? It's kinda hard to tell nowadays.
If only your opponent controls a monster, you can also play one-shot a monster from your deck and face down defense position. Its battle position can be changed! What the fuck?
Konami seems to push the limit of what skills are even allowed to do every other week nowadays. In 2025, skills get you a specific card, put monsters from your deck or even from outside your deck on the field, giving you bonus cards if you go second, in a game where you can choose who goes first, and so on. But for the longest time, this question had a much simpler answer, and that answer was Cyberstyle. In fact, some veteran players might argue to this day that Cyberstyle, as it was, far outshines any of the broken skills that succeeded it. The skill and its associated deck suffered nerf after nerf across several years, and yet it kept going. Well, it's time to get into the history of Cyberstyle. Before we can get started, I have a favor to ask of you. If you enjoy these types of history videos, please make sure to let me know through a like, a comment, and by subscribing if you haven't already. These videos take way more time to make than my former gameplay videos, and I'd really like for them to perform as well, so thank you in advance for your support, and back to the video. When Zane Truesdale first showed up as a roaming duelist in January 2018, Duel Links players were excited to unlock him. Eventually, for some reason, Zane showed up twice before being obtainable, once in January 2018 and then once again in June 2018. During those events, players could obtain several Cyber Dragon cards as post-duel drops, including Proto Cyber Dragon, Cyber Dragon Survive, Cybernetic Fusion Support, Cyber Repair Plant, and last but not least, Chimera Tech Overdragon. You'll notice the OG Cyber Dragon was conspicuously missing from this list, so obviously Konami was saving it for the actual release of Zane, right? Right? Well, Zane was finally made available in July 2018 and his unlock event was really disappointing. His event drops didn't have any traces of Cyber Dragon, but instead focused on Cyber Dark Dragon and his components, and we all know how playable those were. No Cyber Dragons in his level up rewards either, and only Cyber Dragon Dry. Speaking of level up rewards, Zane Truesdale was the first Duel Links character whose level 30 rewards wasn't 300 gems, but instead an additional copy of Cyber Hand Dragon, his ace monster, with the first being included in his starter deck, because it's the second Cyber Hand Dragon that really gets you. But how the heck were you supposed to summon Cyber Hand without any Cyber Dragons? Fortunately, Konami came with a solution of their own, the dedicated skill Cyberstyle. When you activated the skill, if your life points were at 3000 or below, you'd be able to put a Proto Cyber Dragon from thin air onto your field for every 1000 life points below 3000, which means if you're at 1000 life points or below, you could get 3 Proto Cyber Dragons at once, and then you could easily summon Cyber End. There was just a teeny tiny teensy problem with this skill. It doesn't have to do with what the skill said, but rather what it didn't. The skill only had one restriction, its once per duel clause, and nothing else. There was nothing forcing you to use these free monsters as fusion material, you can simply just tribute them to summon high level monsters. Which is exactly what players did. Cyber Dragons as a deck was nowhere near playable, but its skill Cyberstyle ended up seeing a lot of play for this reason, as a skill that enabled high level monsters like yugiohs and vampires for instance. Alternatively, you could also use them as fodder for your high level ninjas, or for your protector with eyes of blue, so you can easily access your blue eyes. All of these decks that I'm showing, by the way, are tournament topping lists, and it didn't stop there. The original iteration of Cyberstyle was messed up, and Konami didn't realize it until it was too late. Cyberstyle was eventually nerfed in October 2018, preventing you from using the Proto Cyber Dragon as tribute fodder or material for anything other than a fusion summon. Of course, there were still some niche cases in which you could use the Protos outside of Cyberstyle, for the summon of an Arcana Force EX monster, for instance, or to destroy with Crystron monster effects. But it mostly put an end to the unconventional uses of Cyberstyle. Not that it helped Cyber Dragons as a deck much, especially considering the OG Cyber Dragon still wasn't in the game. Cyber Dragon would eventually come as a UR in the main box Cybernetic Revolution, released in July 2019. The cover card of this main box was none other than Cyber Twin Dragon, which also released, because this is how card releases work in Duel Links. With these new toys in its arsenal, Cyber Dragons proceeded to keep doing nothing, especially compared to the aforementioned Cristrons, and it says in the script to add another deck here, because I forgot to do research on this part, so let's pretend I did that. Cyber Dragon Via would be added to the pool of SR rank tickets, which didn't make Cyber Dragon's meta or anything, but that was nice. And then we got Future Horizon in late December 2019, a main box choke full of support for plenty of archetypes. Thunder Dragons got Dragon Duo, Dark Magician got Circle, and Cyber Dragons got several amazing cards. Cybernetic Overflow, an archetypal trap that asks you to banish any number of Cyber Dragon monsters from your hand, field, or graveyard with different levels to destroy that many cards on the field without targeting them. That alone made it worth playing, but it also had another effect. If it got destroyed by a card effect, you'd be able to search a Cyber back row. Cyberload Fusion, a quick play fusion spell that shuffled materials back from the field or your banished card into the deck to fusion summon a monster that mentions Cyber Dragon as material, but only that monster could attack this turn. Cyber Dragon Core, a low-level monster that became Cyber Dragon on the field or grave, allowed you to search a Cyber back row on summon, and could banish the tail from the graveyard to summon a Cyber Dragon from deck. And last but certainly not least, Cybernetic Rampage Dragon, a 2100 attack fusion monster that could be fusion summoned using at least 2 Cyber Dragon monsters, popped back row when summoned up to the number of materials it used, and could send up to 2 Cyber Dragon monsters from your deck to the graveyard to get that many additional attacks this turn. With this new support, it didn't take long for Cyber Dragon to overwhelm ladder and show up in tournaments as well. Here's what the average Cyber Dragon list looked like at the time. Thanks to Cyber Style, the deck could easily turn a single Cosmic Cyclone into an additional body for Overflow, or Fusion, or even both, in that order, in the same turn, which would pretty much allow you to fully clear your opponent's board during their turn, and finish them off with Rampage on the next turn. Cyber Dragon stopped a lot of smaller tournaments, but didn't go farther than top 32 in the Meta Championship Series, colloquially known as MCS, which in turn earned them a spot on the tier list, though only as a tier 3 deck. Explosive as it was, the deck still had plenty of exploitable weaknesses, namely, decks that could produce and protect much larger monsters like Dark Lords, Invoked and Shiranui could easily stonewall Cyber Dragon, which would have to bend backwards to make Cyber Hand in order to even beat over those. Some versions attempted to mitigate this by playing Concentrating Current, which made Rampage or Twin large enough to beat over pretty much anything in the game, but unfortunately this wasn't enough to keep Cyber Dragons in the tier list. The deck had little representation in tournaments and even less serious results. Cyber Dragons would return to the tier list when said list focused on the KC Cup format, which is to say best of 1 as opposed to best of 3 with side decking, a format in which Dark Magician reigned supreme and Cyber Dragons were a good counter to it. Yeah, Dark Magician used to be the best deck in the game. And let me tell you, it was zero fun to play against. Cyber Dragons would take 2 spots in the top 100 of this KC Cup, include a weird hybrid invoked list in top 10. What would you be playing Necro Valley? The following ban list in March 2020 would leave Cyber Dragon unscathed, but it would hit every other deck in the format, including Element Sabers, Dark Lord, Shiranuis, Black Winds, and Ritual Beast, but excluding Dark Magician because Konami showed clear favoritism towards the biggest glue-eating deck of the format. I don't like Dark Magician. Also, fun fact, but these were the very first Limit 3s in the game's history. Cyber Dragon would get dropped from the tier list again for a whole week, citing a mediocre Thunder Dragons matchup, a deck which was on the rise following the release of Chaos Dragon Levany as a selection box exclusive. Some things never change. But they came back in the very next tier list, which once again focused on the upcoming KC Cup. That tier list also moved Thunder Dragons down a tier, and moved Element Sabers and Shiranui up to tier 1. By then, the Cyber Dragon list hadn't changed much since the beginning of the year, though usage of Concentrating Current became more Current. The deck performed decently in the April 2020 KC Cup, getting 9 lists in top 100, even though they didn't get a single one in top 10. The format wasn't too different from the previous one. Shiranui still dominated, Kristrons had made a comeback in the format thanks to new support, Element Sabers, Dark Magician, Thunder Dragons, you get the drill, and new Omni Hero support. All of these decks got hit in the May 2020 ban list, but once again, Cyber Dragon dodged any hits. Clearly, Cyber Dragon wasn't a problem deck and would continue to do nothing in the next couple of months. Anyway, in June 2020, we'd get another KC Cup, except this time was called the KC Grand Tournament. Cyber Dragons would be the second most successful deck of that event, getting 21 spots in top 100, including one in top 10, just below Kristrons, and their 25 spots including top 1. Here's what the Cyber Dragon list that got 4th place globally looked like. Keen-eyed players will likely have noticed the inclusion of a very unique field spell, Fusion Gate. This card allowed both players to fusion summon by banishing monsters from their hand or field any number of times per turn. Combined with Cybernetic Fusion support, this resulted in a really cool combo where you'd activate Fusion support, dropping life points by 2000, then activate Cyber Style, then Fusion Gate to fuse the 2 protos that you got for free into a Rampage, use Rampage's effect to send 2 Cyber Dragons to the graveyard, and then use Fusion Gate once again with the effect of Fusion support to fusion summon another Rampage, a Twin Dragon, or maybe even a Cyber End. Amusingly, though Dragonities weren't a format-defining deck, they also did get some tops in this KCGT, including one very funky list using Cyber Style of their skill. The skill prevented you from using the Cyber Protos as material, but you could still use them to protect your life points before OTKing on the next turn. That's kinda messed up, actually. Following this performance, Cyber Dragons would receive several nerfs on the July 2020 ban list. First and foremost, Cybernetic Overflow was moved to Limited 2, which conflicted with Hatronade, Enemy Controller, and Concentrating Current. More importantly, however, Cyberstyle also received a massive change. The skill would prevent you from attacking with anything other than fusion monsters, and you'd also only be able to activate it if you were at 2000 life points or below. You'd still get the same number of protos though. These changes resulted in Cyber Dragons getting demoted from the tier list once again, this time for good. Clearly the skill changes were simply too much, and Cydras weren't competitively relevant anymore. And yet, despite what Big Decade would have you believe, people kept playing Cydras in tourneys and occasionally topping them, especially in point battle rooms. Cydras would even have 4 spots in the September 2020 KC Cup, including one list in top 10 using the aforementioned Fusion Gate combo, as well as offerings to the Doom and Mirror Wall. What year was this? However, Konami had bigger fish to fry, fish named Karakuris and Witchcrafters, so Cyber Dragons once again avoided attention. They'd be right back on the tier list on tier 3 for the November 2020 KC Cup, with the top layer console noting that fast OTK decks were decent candidates for this specific format. Cydras would get 6 lists in top 100 this time around, including 2 in top 10, both helmed by the same player, notably including the newly released Fiendish Chain, and the old free-to-play staple Storm to combo with Overflow, and a lower monster count than ever. Then again, 5 monsters were kind of all you needed when your skill allowed you to generate 2 for free, well, not 3, but it costed 2000 life points. The December 2020 ban list was massive, eating pretty much every DSOD Era deck, but not touching Cyber Dragons once more. The shift in the metagame resulted in Cyber Dragons being promoted to tier 1, with its worst matchups having been nerfed and its explosiveness uncontested. The tier list also moved Witchcrafters to tier 1, which confused a lot of people. Both would get demoted to tier 2 the very next week once it became clear that Desperado was making a comeback in the metagame, it too benefiting from its poor matchups getting nerfed. It also bears mentioning that Desperado has a great matchup against Cyber Dragon thanks to that boss monster clearing up any battle phase threats. The week after that marked the return of Invoke Neos, which was another poor matchup for Cyber Dragons, and another reason for their demotion to tier 3, and the week after that, Cyber Dragons got demoted entirely. The deck would return to the tier list once Desperado suffered heavy nerfs in March 2021, though the deck barely changed since its last iteration. Hey look, it's everyone's favorite selection box exclusive. Sidras would drop once again once old rivals in the form of Blue Eyes and Dark Lords came back to the forefront of the metagame. Only returning, as was becoming tradition, in every KC Cup tier list always because it was still a fast and consistent OTK deck, and dropping out of the tier list once it focused on best of 3 tournaments once again. It's worth noting that the deck got a handful of spots in both the February and April 2021 KC Cups. The latter led to Cyber Dragon suffering 2 hits in May 2021, with Storm getting Limited 1 and Cybernetic Fusion support being put to Limited 2 alongside Overflow. The change to Storm put an end to spicier tech like Abysscorn being included in the deck as niche removal option, which was way more popular on ladder than in tourneys, but still fun enough to mention here. Despite these hits, Cyber Dragons performed admirably in the 2021 KCGT in June, with 13 spots in the top 100 and 3 in top 10. Not much had changed deck-wise, with all lists being virtually the same. 1 Fusion support, 1 Overflow, 1 Storm. Core being able to search the former 2 made the deck much more consistent than one would think. After Atronate finally got banned in July 2021, Cyber Dragons were one of the few decks that could reliably OTK. This being said, this era of Duel Links was also determined by decks with pretty strong turn 1 options, with Onomats in particular being able to leverage Digital Bug Rhinoceros, Gaia getting their own Discount Trident, Harpies getting Cyber Slash, and so on. As monster-based disruption became more prevalent, Sydra's edge against back row decks became less and less relevant. Sidras would once again return to the tier list for the September 2021 KCGT, showing up at tier 2, where it got 11 top spot in top 100, including 2 in top 10, but don't expect these lists to blow your mind. Some spicier Sidra lists of late ZEXAL played Heatwave, which basically protected you if you were going first. Stay hydrated, by the way. Following the KC Grand Tournament, Cyber Dragons were officially annihilated. Cyberlord Fusion was moved to Limited 2, conflicting with Overflow and Fusion support, and if that wasn't enough, Cyberstyle was completely reworked. The newly reworked Cyberstyle now only summoned Cyber Dragons from your deck, made their attack 0, and prevented you from using anything other than Cyber and Dragon until the end of your opponent's turn, basically neutering Rampage Dragon plays as well. This was the Cyber Straw that broke the Cyber Camel's back. After these changes, Cyber Dragon were basically left without a skill on top of losing 2 Cyberlord Fusion, which all but killed the deck. Some people experimented with other skills, including Master of Fusion and Destiny Draw, but they didn't get much competitive success. In November 2021, Konami would release a new EX structured deck, Cyberstyle Extreme, which included Cyber Dragon Hackster and Cyber Dragon Nova, as well as a new skill for Sidras, designed to make it easier to summon rank 5 monsters. The deck saw some competitive play. It notably got top 4 in Meta Weekly 207, where 4 out of 5 Sidra players made it to top 32, and it got top 8 in MCS 49. Despite these honorable performances and a top 100 spot in the February 2022 KC Cup, Sidras would never make it back onto the tier list, and interest in the deck would slowly but surely fade away, as Arc 5 introduced more competitive archetypes: Phantom Knights, Gandora, Burning Abyss, Rose Dragons, you know these decks. Also, Master Duel happened, so maybe all of the Cyber Dragons players just moved there, I don't know. The impact of Cyber Dragon's continued existence would be felt for years. Cybernetic Fusion support would eventually be freed on March 2022, but Cyberlord Fusion wouldn't get freed until March 2025, long after Cyber Dragon stopped being relevant. In the meantime, Cybernetic Overflow was moved to Limited 1 in June 2024, then back to Limited 2 on November 2024 when it conflicted with Fusion until March 2025. It is still Limited 2 to this day. Cyber Dragons are now technically stronger than ever, especially after Cyber Dragon Infinity released in October 2024, alongside Cyber Emergency and the Starving Venom main box, in addition to another new Cyber skill in the form of Immortal Cyberstyle. But other decks out there have been getting much better skills, and Cydra's never returned to the forefront of the metagame. Nowadays, Duel Links players rightfully remember Cyberstyle as a broken skill that overstayed its welcome, an omen of terrible designs to come, which nowadays makes Cyberstyle look almost tame. Almost. And though Cyber Dragons were never the definitive best deck of any given format, it always lived in players' mind as an incredibly threatening OTK strategy that seemed impossible to stop in its tracks. And to be completely honest with you, I kinda miss it. It wasn't a half-wheel skill by any stretch of the imagination, but it did give birth to a pretty unique deck that definitely wouldn't have existed otherwise. It was pretty fun to play, it had some interesting combos and interactions, and it lives in my mind as a remnant of an era, where combo decks that try to OTK you on turn 2 weren't the norm just yet. I miss Cyberstyle because it reminds me of a time where Duel Links felt more exciting to play. It had a stronger community, and it wasn't living in the shadow of a much more free-to-play friendly alternative. I miss Cyberstyle because it reminds me of Duel Links' better years. But it definitely was a bonkers skill and should have been addressed much earlier. What was Konami thinking? But what do you think? Do you have fond memories of Cyberstyle? Or did you just hate the deck through and through? Both opinions are completely valid, to be honest. It all depends on which side of the Cyberstyle you were on. Let me know in the comments below, maybe comment something that you just remembered, a particular duel against Cyber Dragons that latched onto your memory, or maybe just say something nice about Cyber Dragons in general. Regardless, I do hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to like it and subscribe if you haven't already. If you'd like to support me further, you can find my Ko-fi in the video description, where you can make a one-time donation or a monthly pledge, or you can become a YouTube channel member. I'd like to thank my Ko-fi donators in the forms of Dingus, Howdishboy 0, Jimmy, Zinnia, Yannike, Sile, Marklu, Fortuno16, the Abysactor Guru, Orc Price and Exorcist. And I would like to thank my YouTube channel members Sternay, Crimson Reaper 5, Troy Bolton, Genius Wannabe, and Seal Luge. Thank you all for the support. I'm not sure which deck I'm going to take a look at next, so if you have any suggestions, these are most welcome. In the meantime, thank you all for watching this video once again, take care everyone, and I will see you all next time.